Thank you for listening to Southern Gospel Journal. My name is Daniel Mount, and this evening I have the privilege of being joined by Dusty Wells. How are you this evening?
I'm doing good, Daniel. It's good to see you.
Good
Good
to
to
see you too. I'm going to say right up top, I love your podcast that you do with Dave Clark. I love to tell the story. I've been listening to it since the first episode, listen to every episode. It's a delight to talk with you.
That's awesome. I appreciate that so much. Dave and I have been friends for years, and we would get together for lunch, and we would talk. We'd have sometimes we'd have an agenda, but almost every time we would get together, we'd end up just telling stories because we both were the same age. I always love to tease him that he's a lot older than me, but he's not. I'm older than him. But we would just end up telling road stories and stories about the music and the artistry and the songs and how it impacted our lives. And we finally several years ago said, let's do a podcast. And I honestly thought, okay, this will last a year. We'll get. We are having the time of our lives, and we're going on to our third year, and just so when I love that you've listened to all of them. When you were telling me that earlier, that just because there's been some of the ones you think, uh, okay, how's this gonna, those are the ones that have been really effective and touch people's lives.
Mm.
And we do. We love telling the stories and hearing the different people who have been impacted by this great music and that we call Christian music. So yeah, so thank you.
Yes. Thank you. So this episode's a bit of a hybrid because it's inevitable as we talk about this topic that we're talking about your life and testimony. But our entryway into this is an album that has just come out. We Shall Behold Him, a tribute to Dottie Rambo. And that just came out this past Friday as of recording. But this album, I know it's special to you because of the role the Rambos played in your testimony. So if you would, let's just start there.
I was a 14-year-old kid. My mom had been married numerous times,
Mhm.
was raised on in a development for widows and people on welfare. It was a housing authority. It was a little project. It was nice little, cute little apartments, but low income families. And my mother was a great mom. She's still alive. I get to go see her next month. She's in Twin Falls, Idaho, but she was a product of her own environment. Her life had been just as rough, and so she raised me and my sister and my brother the best that she could. But it was a pretty tough road. She kept searching for love, acceptance, forgiveness, and she chose a lot of wrong paths. But we didn't know anything about church, Daniel. Nothing. I remember I do remember one thing. I had a great grandmother that I'd went and seen her in Oregon one time, and I remember she had a picture on her wall of the Jesus, and it was the close up thing of Jesus with the lamb over his shoulders. And I always thought that we but I don't ever remember anybody. We never went to church. We never talked about the Lord. We had to steal our school clothes. It was
Mm,
used in most every way. But Saturday afternoon, I was sitting at home. And it was February of 1972, and it was cold and snowy. And I got a knock on our little apartment door, and I thought, who's here? It was in Saturday afternoon, and I went to the door, and this precious couple was standing there, and they said, "Hey, we're Keith and Sharon Johns, and we're inviting Sunday school on a church bus, and we have activities. We're going to go up to the South Hills and go snowmobiling." They said all these great things. I thought, we didn't have a car, we didn't have a lot of money. I thought this sounded fun, and this couple took an interest in me, and I went to church with them the next Sunday. Went back, and they led me to the Lord a few weeks later. And they took such an interest in me, and they had their own family and their own life. I was 14 years old. One of the coolest things, I was a big pop music lover. I loved Carole King. I like to call it harp music. James Taylor, the Carpenters, and I loved music, and I'd listened to a lot of music. I'd never heard of anything Christian, but they'd take me over to their house on Sunday afternoon. She'd cook dinner, and they didn't have a TV, but they did have a stereo turntable with a lot of vinyl records. And they'd go in the living room, and they'd sit in their lounge chairs. They'd say, "Well, Dusty, why don't you find us some music?" And I'd go down there, and I'd look at these records, and here was this this group called the Singing Rambos, and this lady with her big hairdo, and Reba with her big bouffant, and Buck with that curled up lip and his mustache, and I'd listen to these songs, groups like the Downings, the Lanny Wolf Trio. I mean, it was such that era of music was so you didn't call it Southern gospel, you just called it music that touched your heart, and I'd listen to
Mhm.
and I'd hear these lyrics like, "I feel the touch of hands so kind and tender. They're leading me." And I'd play these albums over and over, and I started reading the credits, and I just fell in love with the Rambos music. I fell in love with those harmonies. Um, I fell in love that country kind of Southern style, and so I just began to collect their music, and I remember they became my best friends. They didn't even know it. I was from Twin Falls, Idaho, and, I started collecting their music. I started going out to the record store. I found out what a Christian bookstore was, and I started volunteering to help, and this lady, her name was Mary. The Christian bookstore was called, Magic Valley Christian Supply and Harry's Bait and Tackle Shop, because she owned the Christian bookstore part of it, and her husband had the bait and tackle shop that was attached to it. But I'd go in there and she'd say, "You know, you can hit you know so much about music," because I started studying it out,
Mhm.
just reading everything I could, and, we didn't have internet back then, but I had the singing news that I'd see in her store, and there was a magazine that was just getting started called CCM, Contemporary Christian, and I'd study everything about it. I just read cover to cover. I'd go in and find big catalogs where it would talk about the new releases, but the Rambos had that special place in my heart, and, fast forward it, I collected all their music. I never wrote them a fan letter. I'm from Idaho.
Mhm.
But fast forward it about, I was 24, maybe 10 years later, I went to a concert. Started working at a Christian bookstore. I got married, started working at a Christian bookstore in Portland, Oregon, where my wife was from. And one day I was a music buyer for 8 stores called Christian Supply, and I saw a poster pop up, Daniel, and they brought it in. They said, "Hey, we're having the Rambos in a high school here."
Mhm.
I was in hog heaven. That
Mhm.
I had produced to, Christian, back then, early Jesus music, and I love Dallas Home and
Mhm.
Keith and Michael Card, I
Mhm.
artists I really loved. But the Rambos, the Lanny Wolf Trio, and the Downings, they were the ones that I just man, I thought so me and my wife, she was 9 months pregnant, and we went to the ramp, and it was in a high school trip. There's about 800 people, and this is how God is so I love his cleverness and how faithful he is to us. Uh, I said we got great tickets. They were on the front row. We got there real early, and, the middle of the concert, I went back to the record table, and they weren't back there, but I wanted to meet him, and I wanted to say how much I appreciate their music, and it was Buck and Dottie and Reba and Donnie, and it was called the Rambos Reunion. They didn't have the band, Donnie on the keyboards, and they were using tracks, and so after the concert, I went back there, and everybody was standing around the record table, and it was just Buck and Donnie over there, and I thought, "Wonder where Reba," and so I turned, and I looked down the hallway, and Reba and Dottie were standing there by themselves. As I look back at it now after traveling with them for years, Reba and Dottie were always at the table. That's who everybody wanted to see. Nothing against Buck, nothing against Donnie.
Mm.
They talked to Dottie Rambo or Reba Rambo, and, but for some reason, they were down there, so I walked back there and I said, "Hi, Miss Rambo, I'm Dusty Wells, and I just love your music." And Daniel, out of the blue, I said, "And you know what? One of these days, I'm gonna work for you." And she grabbed Reba's arm, and she said, "Reba, do you remember me at intermission looking out the curtain and pointing at the guy in the white suit?" She said, "That guy's supposed to be involved in our ministry." And we exchanged phone numbers, which I traveled with him years after this. This stuff never happened, but it was a
Yeah.
God, and I believe God just looked down and said, Dusty, you've been faithful about this music, and you've shared it to." I mean, I'd share it with everybody, and so it was a few years later, I went to work for Sparrow Records, And then but I'd go out on the road with them. Buck would call me and say, "Hey, we're gonna be in San Antonio. Why don't we fly you out here and you be with us, help us with the date, da da da." And I did that for years. And then I was about 28, 29. They called me up and they said, "We'd like for you to work for us full time." And my wife and our two little girls moved to Atlanta, Georgia. And that's been, many, many years ago, and I got to travel and take care of Dottie and Reba and Donnie and Buck and work with, started their publishing company, and, when they went through a really tough time, as everybody knows, Buck and Dottie divorced, and, I went to work for Word Records and spent 25 years there, but I went when I sat down with Word, I said I'd still wanna travel with Dottie, and Word was so gracious, and so I was able to do that, and we've been dear friends forever. Just dear friends. I still keep in touch with Reba, I still keep in touch with Donnie, kept in touch with Buck. They were just they were really heroes and mentors into my life.
Yeah,
So it's a great story,
it
um,
is.
a God story. It's a
It
God,
is.
you know, so, yeah. So that's how I got started with them, and, her songs, you know how they touch that heartstring of all of our
Mhm.
everyone, every person that seems like I've talked to at times. I'll go to quartet convention, and it amazes me at how her songs are 50, 60, 40 years old. Night after night, you hear them redone in a special new way, and artists still singing them, and you watch the audience, you think that's the power of what Christian music is all about, and
Yeah.
I'm a product of that.
It is, and it is an amazing story, and it shows why you're the perfect person to shepherd this project and bring it forward. I don't think there's anybody in the world who could have cared about it as much as you do, because something Gold City shared on their podcast is Danny Riley has a different perspective on goals that Tim Riley's dead. That's what he grew up with. And he appreciates it. He knows it was big. But the other guys who have come in, Jeff Chapman, Josh Feimster, Chris Jenkins, they're like, this is Gold City. We sat in the sat in the stage pews and watched Brian and Ivan and Mike, and then we watched Jonathan and Jay and Mark. This is gold. Like they have that fire and passion for Gold City that is different when you come at it from the outside. You see the impact from the outside, and then you're on the inside and you help make that impact. And I think you're the person perfectly positioned to make this tribute happen. And I'm thrilled that you did it. And I think that's the perfect pivot point if you would talk about where did the idea come from? How long has this been in the works?
Well, when Dottie would go on the road, even in the midst of her great where she would get a lot of freedom from the pain was when she'd go out and sing and talk to people, and
Mhm,
I'd go with her. I would travel with her for numerous years all across the United States, big churches, conferences, and I would watch her do, those songs just by herself, and,
mhm,
the Rambos legacy, was so incredible that there were those harmonies, those parts, but that
mhm,
again with the songs, and Dottie, she just wrote some of the most incredible songs. So it's been
mhm,
20, 25 years ago. I've been at Daywind for 10 years now almost, and when Word decided to close distribution, Word and Daywin got together and said Dusty would be the perfect person to be the liaison because they were going over to Daywin. So I came out there having a rich heritage at Word, and we had actually started this project. Word Curb, and I had talked about it, but it was back then. I was still going to have some Southern gospel artists, but it was going to be artists like Point of Grace, uh, different more artists that were real church. Great, great artists, great
yeah.
artists. And so we had a list of artists. I started compiling the list of songs. And what I even as I look at the project today, almost with the exception of maybe one or two songs, they were all the songs that I wanted to use back then because they were songs that had touched my heart. But in my journeys, when I'd sit there, when I'd hand Dottie her guitar, I'd watch the audience because I've always said I always wanted to write a book about stories from behind the record table or else stories sitting on the front row, because 'cause I'd watch the people when she'd do a little thing where she'd call out, "What song would you like to hear?" And it was always, "If That Isn't Love,"
Mhm,
Shelter, God, the holy hills of heaven call me. And she had certain, she would open every service, Daniel, by herself. She'd open with Holy Spirit, thou art welcome. And she'd always close with we shall behold him.
Mhm.
That was her signature. She always had a starting place. So I knew those songs. And so as I began to when word got they got sold, I moved over to Daywind, and I started talking about it actually about probably about 4 or 5 years ago, real serious again with Dottie Leonard, our wonderful, the owner who started the she passed away a couple of years ago, but she loved the music of Dottie Rambo. She'd do tracks, they'd do a songbook. And I said, "We need to do," when I went into A&R, I said, "One of the projects I'd love to do is I'd love to do a tribute to Dottie Rambo." And, so I got the go ahead. So I started putting everything together, and, it absolutely every song and every artist. I talked to Joseph, and, Joseph I had reached out there. I said, "What would you like to see if you were gonna sing a Dottie Rambo song, what would you sing?" And what is so many I had so many that almost every artist said a different song. Every artist said so, and they honest goodness, probably out of the 11 songs, 9 of them were in that list. 9 of them were in their list. And so, um, started with Holy Spirit, Thou art welcome, which Joseph said that was his favorite song to sing when he was growing up, and he would sing it. Um, and that song has always just been such a perfect opener because I mean, the Holy Spirit, that's what you well, I've often said, I've teased Gerald Wolf about it all the time, and Gerald teased back with me. Man, can you imagine if every church just would open their not because it's a Dottie Rambo song, but the lyrics to that song, Holy Spirit, thou art welcome in this place, right here.
Mhm.
Mold us, change us, make us like so, but every song just fell into place. One of the greatest things, one of my sweetest memories, and it's bittersweet. The Neat were some of my dearest friends, and we all know the
Mhm.
tragedy that took their lives with the exception of Precious Autumn.
Mhm.
I had asked the Nealons what they wanted to sing, and they said, "Dusty, we love singing 'We Shall Behold Him.'" And
Mhm.
that song I would have chosen for him. And so we had that prepared. We were in the middle of doing the track, and the accident happened. Well, I knew that 20 some odd years ago, I had asked Selah to sing that on the
Hmm.
project, and Selah and I had worked together, and Selah loves they love Southern gospel, they love heart music, but the Nealons and Selah were really dear, dear friends, and it was about right um, after the Nealons had gone home to be with the Lord. I knew I wanted Autumn to sing it. I thought I just out of the blue, Todd Smith from Selah called me, and he said, "Dusty, are you gonna ever do that Dottie Rambo tribute?"
Mhm.
And I said, "Todd, this is that's where you know the faithfulness of God." And I don't know if you that song, when I listened to it with Autumn starting it off
Mhm.
and then Selah joining and the promise that we shall behold one of
Yeah.
these. So there's some cool moments on this project that, um, I had asked tribute. One of my favorite songs is "Sheltered in the Arms of God," one of the first songs
Mhm.
I remember singing when I got saved, and they sang that was the first song that Gus, from Tribute ever sang as a solo when he was 4 years old.
Wow.
So you hear these kind of stuff. I knew the song for "You'll Love This" because of the cathedrals. For
Mhm.
what reason was
Mhm.
Rambo's favorite. She didn't have favorite songs, but she always said one of her favorite babies was "For What Earthly Reason," her favorite version, and many artists recorded it, her favorite version was the Cathedrals.
Mhm.
Of course, Danny sang it back then,
Unbelievable.
and, I knew I wanted the closest thing that I could get to the Cathedrals was Greater Vision.
Mhm.
Gerald, how much Gerald and Chris, and I thought to myself and Rod, I thought, "They will dress this up, and it is absolutely beautiful." So,
If I could ask, while
yeah,
we're talking about For What Earthly Reason, do you have any idea why it was special to her?
she had a memory. She always tell me she'd had that idea, she said she'd hear people say, "Oh, for what earthly reason? For what earth"
Mhm,
she said her mother and her grandmother always said it, and she started, just sing she always sang about the she loved songs about the cross, you know, she
mhm,
loved to sing about the cross. Um, she just started writing some notes one day, and she said all of a sudden it just hit her, "For what earthly reason would the Father send down his Son?" And she said it perfectly flowed, and she knew, and when she sang it, she would sit there with her guitar or else she'd have a track, and it was the 3rd song she did every night.
hmm,
She just and people would love it because it was one of those later songs of her life when she was writing a lot more, differently than she had in the early years, but it to me is one of the most special songs because it was so simple when you think about the lyrics, and that's where Dottie those lyrics were so simple, yet they were so profound, all of them. So,
yes. You
she
know I'm
loved
sorry.
Virgin, so
Yes. While we're talking about songs from different eras, there is one that we have to talk about because it's from such a different era than the others. I looked at it. So there's this project has 4 songs from the 60s,
yeah, yeah,
5 from the 70s,
yep,
2 from the 80s,
yep,
and then 1 from 2008.
yes, that's
We
exact
we we have to talk about Calvary Will Never Run Out of Songs. Now, I'm going to plug your podcast again because I absolutely love it. You did an episode of Reba Rambo where she talked about this song. But while we're here, while we're talking, could you share the story of this song?
absolutely. You know, for years, I mean, I if you know the Steve Hurst School of Music or things
Hmm.
he would teach at, or she would we would go in and she would the songwriting class, there inevitably or we'd get a letter and they'd say, "Dottie, how do you you never run out of creativity, you never," and she would very not flippantly in a bad way, but she'd always say, "Oh, darling, Calvary's never gonna run out of songs." She said that as long as you've got the cross and what he did for us, well, it'll never run out of songs. You just think back to that. And she would say that. Well, in the latter years, before she was pretty well, she'd go out, but she was bedridden quite a bit. She had a little briefcase that she would write and put her little song notes in and everything. And one day, Reba and Destiny went over there, and um, they were talking about Calvary will never run out of songs. And Dottie said, "Well," and so Reba, she loved to write, and her daughter, Dottie's granddaughter, who Dottie just adored, um, Destiny, they all sat up on Dottie's bed and were just sitting there talking, and they Destiny loved this idea. Destiny was very smart. She had a notebook, and she said, Reba said she asked her mom, and I'd heard this several times right after it all happened. But I remember she said to me, she said, Dusty, she said, I said to her, Mom, how would you begin this song? And all of a sudden, Dottie just perfectly started quoting the first verse of the song. And she said, this is how I would start it and wrote it down. Destiny Wright wrote it. Da da da. They got through the first verse, and Dottie said, "Well, I think that's all I want to do today. I'm just gonna go back to sleep. Would you go get me a banana popsicle because you love popsicles?" And so they put it in that little attaché, that little briefcase. And after Dottie had passed away, they got it out, and Reba and Destiny finished it, and it is absolutely when you hear the majesticness of it.
Hmm.
And Reba, here's her daughter singing it and her granddaughter, and knowing that that was probably the last song, most likely, that Dottie ever.
Hmm.
And it's the truth. Calvary will never run out of songs. They're there. They're there. And I really want that story to be told in a big way to the songwriters that are out there, the people that are out there
Hmm.
that they think, oh, what else? How can we say something new? If you look at all of Dot they they all spoke stuff that some of the new modern worship songs are saying because she knew how to take those lyrics and craft them in such a way that it was real life, and it's what she was walking through. You know, I think back her song, we didn't put it on the record, but it'll be on the next one. Too Much to Gain to Lose. When she
Mhm.
I've crossed the hot burning desert, struggling the right road to choose. How many times have you myself, we've but somewhere up ahead, there's cool, clear water, and defeat is one word I don't use, you know? So, man, every song, there is a story behind it. Feels like, Jim and Melissa Brady, Melissa sang Glory in the Cross for years,
Oh my, that
and
rendition, there's something special.
it is, and I've seen tons of artists. Larnell Harris sang it. Incredible artists, but Melissa and Jim dressed it up as only they could, and it's just absolutely, absolutely stunning. I think one of my favorites, because when I talk to Mark Lowry, who's been a dear friend, and he talks about the Rambos all the time. Well, I knew that I did, and if he was, he'll probably hear this and he'll give me a bad time because he always does. He sings "If That Isn't Love." He sang it with Lord's song. He sang it with The Sound. He sings it for years. I didn't want him to sing that because I knew that people would expect that. Sister
Mhm.
version with sisters. I wanted him to do, because I knew how much he loved the Rambos, and I knew how much Dottie and Buck and Reba, they love Mark. I mean, and one of Dottie's biggest songs that had not been recorded in a while was "He Looked Beyond My Faults," and I thought, "I can hear Mark Lowry doing this." Well, we went down to Houston to record his vocals, and Mark got really sick, but he got through the first verse and the chorus, and it's absolutely incredible. And then Scotty Inman, who I thought was
Mhm.
because he was such a fan of Dottie's, he comes in and he does the first verse again, and then they harmonize, and it's beautiful. It's just beautiful. So, yeah.
Neat. Do you know, "I Will Glory in the Cross" is just
Yeah,
it might be my favorite Rambo song as much as I love the others. Do you happen to know anything of the story behind that one?
I do. Um, Dottie, they were, over and I gotta make sure I tell this right, or Reba will give me a bad time because one of the things that I was able to do years ago, when Dottie would be in a lot of pain, I would go over to her house, and when I had to pay her bills or do things, I'd sit there in the evening, 'cause I was still working full time for Word, but I'd go over there, and when she would be in a lot of, I would try to get her mind distracted off the pain, because I knew what it was like for her to go out and do the concerts, and that's where I'd see her really shine. So I'd take her guitar, her Martin guitar, and I'd take it into the bedroom, and she'd be laying on the bed. I said, "Dottie, here, I'm gonna ask you some questions about your songs." And, I said, I want you to just sit here and tell me the story." And I had a little cassette player, and I was
Mhm.
so blessed that I taped about 40 or 50 of those stories behind the songs. But I'd ask her, "How did you write Germs? How did you write?" And one of them was "I Will Glory in the Cross." And Dottie said everybody thinks that was, written for a church dedication or something like, where the great cathedrals, or just about the cross and all the stuff that's in a cathedral. But they had been asked to sing over, uh, behind the Iron Curtain,
Hmm.
and they had sung there, but they had told him, they said, "Don't sing about the blood, don't sing ab." This was when they were traveling, doing the stuff for Vietnam, but they happened to go behind the Iron Curtain, and they said, "Man, we just want you to do your family harmonies, do your family stuff, do songs about mama and home, because these soldiers wanna be uplifted." And so Dottie, they went into a restaurant, and she said, "I prayed, that God would just let me talk to somebody about Jesus." And she had a little card that she ended up giving to the waitress. But as she walked out of the restaurant, she said, "You know what? I can't sing. They don't want you to sing about the blood. They don't want you to sing about the cross." She said, "Well, let me tell you, that's all I'll ever write about. That's
Mhm.
such
Amen.
glory in the cross. I boast not of." She timed it out just perfectly. And Dottie was the one that she didn't take her a lot of time to write. She wrote just really from her heart. And that song, I hear it sung at Easter time, I hear it sung all but it she wanted to always she wasn't afraid to sing about the cross, she wasn't afraid to sing about the blood because she knew that's what people needed to hear. So, um, it's one of my favorite songs, it's one of her most requested songs. It was always one of the last songs she sang right before We Shall Behold Him, so,
Neat. I have a question about the arrangements on this album.
okay,
There's a lot of consistency stylistically track to track.
yeah.
And sometimes when there's an album like this, it really goes toward the side of each song is geared toward that artist's style. And there might be a little bit of that, but is it the case that on this one you were intentionally more going for a coherent style for the album itself?
You know, we did when I sat down, and it was the same thing when I talked with Ward. I said I wanted. There was a project out years ago that I was involved with called "My Utmost for His
Hmm.
Highest." A beautiful project with contemporary artists take
Yes.
Wald Chambers songs, and it just was so peaceful to beautiful songs. Man After God's Own Heart, Quiet Prayers, Love, so just beautiful songs. When we sat down with Bradley Knight, did all the arranging and, just wrote the charts, and Bradley is a genius. If you follow the Collingsworth
Hmm.
family,
I do.
those groups, Bradley has done the big Brooklyn I mean, he's worked with every choir. He's just he knows that world. I told Bradley, I said, "Bradley, I want that feel. I want it to have some of that beautiful Rambo stuff," which we got. We got that with the artists and the way they sang it. But I said, "I want it to feel like it is a motion picture when people sit down and you start at the beginning and it goes to the end." And, and we really some of those songs we didn't even know how the artists were gonna sound with them. I said, "This is who I'm thinking about. I think this would be perfect." Jonathan Crumpton was tremendous and Rick Shelton, but I knew in my mind, even I'm looking at the list of the artists here right now, I knew I wanted Karen to do Holy Hills of Heaven because it just of that home feeling, and Bradley captured every bit of it in such a beautiful way. It's so consistent. Uh
Mhm.
yeah, I feel like it flows the way I we sat down and I said, "Okay, let's do this song here, this song here, this song here." Um, there were some special things with Southbound because they're that gospel grit kind of, that
Mhm.
and I knew Clint Brown had grown up with Dottie Rambo music, and he had sang Never I Go to the Rock. We had heard him sing that years ago on a project. I knew they would be perfect for that. I knew Adam Crab would be absolutely perfect for "Never Been This Homesick Before" because the Crab family had sang it for years and
I
years.
did. I heard that. Yeah.
I looked at all that, but every arrangement, they did he didn't stray too far from each one, so it all just absolutely flows, and I wanted and Bradley did too. He wanted to make it different enough so it would appeal to other people, and that's what we're hearing. We're hearing other markets say, "Oh my gosh, who is this lady?" We're having songwriters, modern songwriters saying, "Who is it?" Well, that's what I wanted because Dottie Rambo was one of the finest. I've said I wish every artist today could go and study her catalog because it's true. And even Bill Gaither, some of these artists nowadays don't know who the writers are, like Dallas Home, Bill Gaither, Lanny Wolf, Dottie Rambo, but their songs are still being sung constantly, you know. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, the artist not knowing who the writers are, this is a deep cut from the lore of I Love to Tell the Story. Your
Okay.
Chris Blue interview,
Oh,
where he's saying because he lives for Bill Gaither, he's like, "I'm just gonna sing a good old hymn to
yep.
demonstrate what I can do," not realizing he was singing Bill Gaither's song to Bill Gaither. That happens.
It happens all the time. There's another modern day Christian writer, Matt Maher,
Yeah.
who just a great artist. He sang because he lives and he didn't know until one day he was talking with Bill Gaither and he'd sing it for years. He said, "I just thought it was a hymn, an old hymn." That's the kind of stuff when you even you look at Dottie's catalog, well, Holy Spirit, Thou Art Welcome is in tons of hymnals because it's but yet nobody really knew Dottie Rambo. I've heard CeCe Winans sing it. There was a group called Plus One years ago
Oh,
that
yeah.
was biggest. I'll
I know
never
who they are.
I'll never forget the Little Assembly God boy that sang with him. His name was Jason Perry. He asked me one night, he was a word artist, and he said, "Man, I wish I could open with a song at this youth convention." And I just flippantly and kind of jokingly said, "Just walk out there and do Dottie Rambo's Holy Spirit, Thou Art Welcome in this place, 12,000 kids." And Daniel, he said, "Oh my gosh, my mom sings that song. That's an old hymn. I'll do it." I watched him walk out on stage and
Mhm.
sing been 20 years ago, and that crowd just fell into a hush, and people began to worship.
Hmm.
Power of these songs, you know?
Yeah.
So, yeah, Chris Blue was a great I loved when he told us that story because I see that more and more that, "Oh, I didn't know Dottie wrote that song," you know? Going through the Christian music, the New Music Hall of Fame, when you look and see that Dottie, Whitney Houston, I mean, it was one of my favorite stories. One of my favorite stories, Daniel, and I think I've told this on the podcast, was when the Preacher's Wife soundtrack for Whitney Houston,
Mhm.
I Go to the Rock was on that soundtrack. And Whitney was singing on the HBO special. She was in concerts with it. Well, it was nominated for a Dove Award, and it was Dottie's last time she was able to go to the Doves, and they had called me, and they never do this, and they said, "We know Dottie's been real sick, but we're just gonna tell you, we're bringing Whitney in to sing that song," and that song has won for Gospel Song of the Year,
And this is before the award was handed out.
or the word was handed out, and they never do that, but they knew Dottie was very slow, tried to get up, and it was at Bridgestone Arena. And so, we got Dottie there, my wife and I got Dottie there, and we were sitting on the front row over to the side. They had come up, they knew they had told me, but I didn't tell anybody. I didn't tell Dottie, I
Yeah.
didn't and, they said, "No, we're gonna take Dottie back, like, we want her to meet Whitney," and it was gonna be a surprise that Whitney was there. Well, as we got backstage, Whitney was getting ready to go on with the choir, and I said, "Well, Dottie, they have a surprise, you're gonna hear it in a minute." I said, "Whitney Houston's here," and she about that time, we looked over to the side, probably 15 feet away from us. Whitney was standing there, and Whitney, I promise you, Daniel, she went, "Oh my goodness, that's Dottie Rambo right there." And so immediately she went on stage, she sang the song, we won the award, I got Dottie up there, she accepted the award with Whitney, it was a beautiful they took us backstage, and Dottie, I don't know, did you ever get to meet Dottie?
I sadly did not.
She was one of the funniest people and one of the most she wasn't afraid to so we were sitting in this little backstage room. Cindy Wilt, who was the publisher of the music at that time,
Mhm.
several of us there. Um, Dottie walked in. Whitney said, "Oh, I'm so glad to meet you, Dottie." And Dottie just out of the blue said, "Now, darling, tell me, how did you hear this song?" And I was standing there, and you didn't have social media because I sure would have taped it or anything. Whitney looked at her and said, "Dottie, darling, I've been singing your song since I was a little girl." And she started singing Sheltered. She sang
Mhm.
Too Much to Gain to Lose. She just sang a little bit as only Whitney could. And then she went into Holy Spirit, Thou Art Welcome. Then she said, "But my favorite," she said, "I knew I wanted it for the preacher's wife, was I Go to the Rock." And that's where you realize Elvis Presley loved her music. Jerry Lee Lewis. You go through this, Dolly Parton, these artists all fell in love with her music because it was such a real heartbeat,
Mhm.
you know? Oh,
Yeah. Are there so since you put that time into collecting the stories behind so many of her songs, are there any songs that are on this album that just have an incredible story that maybe you haven't had the chance to talk about in another context, or even if you have, I don't care. Um, are there any other song stories that really just jump to the front of your mind as, oh, this song has a story people want to hear if they know and love her music?
I love the story about My Faults. A lot of people probably have heard it. I love Sheltered in the Arms of God, but, you know, um, she's just she had a story. Dottie could not, in my tenure with her, if you study her catalog, the only people she ever wrote with, David Hunsinger helped her write some music, Donnie McGuire, Phil Johnson, they're in the Reba and Destiny thing, but she rarely, if ever, wrote anything with anybody because she you could not. I remember Stephen Chris Chapman, Michael W. Smith, Amy Grant, who all, when we moved back to Nashville from being in Atlanta, everybody wanted to write with her in those days. Bill Gaither wanted to write with her. Gloria did, but Dottie, she it wasn't she was insecure, but she wanted to really make sure you couldn't tell her, "Dottie, I need you to go in there." She probably could have done it, but she didn't. She never wanted to abuse her gifts, not that this would be, "We need you to write a filler song about the blood of Jesus." She had to be inspired. That's nothing against how anybody writes nowadays.
Mhm.
That's Dottie. She was old school. She had, she'd experienced these songs from her heart during times of rejoicing and, hurt and pain. But one of the with, "He Looked Beyond My Faults," I loved what she used to tell about her brother. Her brother had walked away from the Lord, for years and was just had made a mess of his life, just really a mess of his life, and, they were out on the West Coast, and this was her brother that she was so close to, and, she they got a call and they said, "Hey, you probably need to come home. Your brother's getting ready to pass away. He's in the hospital. Cancer is eating him up," and so she, they got home and she wasn't sure if he was even a Christian. She prayed. She spent several days there and he kept saying, "Oh, Dottie, I don't know if God can ever forgive me. I just don't, he won't. He's never going to be." And as Dottie stayed there and sat there, she'd pray for him, she'd talk to him. And she said she used the term several times. He looks beyond all your faults. He knows what you need. She said she would say that over and over to him. She left the hospital and, she came back in the next day and, her brother was sitting up. He said, "Dottie, you know what? He does look beyond our fault. He does."
Mm.
He said, "I asked him to come into my heart." So Dottie wrote that song the next few,
Yeah.
"Looks Beyond Our Faults,"
Mm.
and she said she sang it at his funeral, and,
Wow.
those are the stories that I love. "Sheltered in the Arms of God" is one of my favorite stories, and I used to love it when I would hand her her guitar, and she'd get far away, look in her eyes. I always made her. I did. I'd say, "Now you gotta tell the story behind Sheltered," because it was so beautiful, but she had been going through a really tough time in life, and she had never, it was the first time they'd ever been down to see the ocean, her and Buck and Reba, and they were in their heyday, and she said they were down there and she'd had some a broken heart, and she was out early morning walking the beach, and she had her coffee, and she said Buck was behind her, and, but she was all alone, and she said she'd watch the waves come in, and she'd see all this junk and debris on the sandbar, and she'd watch it come in, the waves come in and take that debris out to the sea, and then it would be gone. She'd watch it, and she'd had some of the verses for, "Sheltered." She knew parts of it, how she "I just don't know how to start it," and as she was walking there, she said all of a sudden, it's the only time she said that she ever did it, she just felt this hand on her shoulder. She thought it was Buck, and she went to turn around, and all of a sudden, she said, "I felt these 5 fingers." She said, "I feel the touch," and she said, "They were so kind and tender." She said, "Aha, that's how you want me to begin the song." And
Mm.
again, it went on to be, it's still one of the most recorded songs. So every song, they just have such sweet, sweet stories. Reba is just finished, and she used some of the cassettes that I'd given her, but she took a lot of her memory also. She's just finishing right, because if anybody could write it, it would be Reba, the story behind the songs, and she has about 30,
That's
or
good.
she's written a book that she's gonna, get published, and it tells a lot of those precious stories, 'cause there's so many. "We Shall Behold Him," she wrote in 7 minutes, driving 7 miles, God just gave her that song on the way to a revival.
Wow. It's amazing. Yeah, well, I am actually very excited to hear that Reba's working on that because when you said that those stories had been recorded, I was like, those
Yeah.
have to be preserved for posterity somehow or another.
Between Reba, myself, there's another young man named Tim that had heard a lot of the stories. We all have a collection of and memories of things that she would say out on the road. I have a lot of VH whenever we do a church, John Hagee's church or any other churches, I'd always get them to tape. My favorite part of the service, she'd come in and we'd do 3 or 4 songs, and then she would sit down with her guitar. And Daniel, that's when she'd tell the story. That's when I always like to say, that's when I saw the Holy Spirit just go, let me show you what I could do, and we'd take requests, and that's when you'd hear the heart of Dottie, where she would talk about those songs, how she wrote them, and, I'm so glad that we've all had those memories, and Reba was very smart to write things down. In my time, it's good to have that kinda stuff that you're reminded by of how important that is and how these songs will live on. I mean, some of them were written in the '60s, and yet they're still being recorded, you know? And that's
Yeah.
I wanted this project. At the end of the day, I know what this music did for me. I know what it still does for me. I did not listen to the full project. We actually did a premiere last year at the Quartet convention, and it was really sweet. Um, But I kept listening to the songs, bits and pieces, but I waited for about 3 months before I listened to it in its entirety this last week at midnight when the record released. I got out of bed, and I sat in my living room, and I listened to the record, and I thought, "I know without a shadow of doubt this is gonna touch people's lives," because I had some moments that I listened to those songs, I thought, I remember what I was like as a kid, as a teenager, and thinking I had no hope, and then I'd hear songs like "If That Isn't Love," "Sheltered in the Arms of God," and what it did for me, and why I'm doing what I do today is just so much because of these songs.
Neat. Now, the next question I was actually going to ask you was if there were plans to stage any of this live, at least that you could talk about. But I think you might have touched on that already. So you already did some of this at last year's Quartet convention?
Did, we did almost every song at Quartet Convention, with the exception of and we taped it. We'll have it out this year. We didn't Adam was not there. He was on a Gaither tour, and Mark Lowry was not there, but we did every other song, including Destiny, I mean, everything. We did every other song except those 2. We did 9 of the songs, but then I also had one of the first groups that recorded one of Dottie's songs. We just happened to sign him last year, and it was one of Dottie's best friend was Anna Gordon, uh,
Hmm.
Duckwagon Gang, and they had one of the first groups that recorded one of her songs. They did an old song called "There's Nothing, No Nothing, My God,"
Oh, I love that song.
open the event, just them and their instruments doing "There's Nothing," but it flowed, and then the choir and all them come out, and they did the whole program, and then I had High Road towards the end, who I love. They had really done, the song, it was one of her older "When I Lift Up My Head,"
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
When I'm Down.
I actually, so I never got to see Dottie live, but there was about 2009 or 10, somewhere in there. NQC did a Rambos reunion segment on main stage with Reba was there and Destiny was there and Buck was there.
It was
And
it was called "Remembering the Greats" at Precious.
the band
Yeah,
was High Road.
yes.
And I heard them play for the Rambos, and I was like, "Wow, these young ladies are unbelievable." Got their C I got, they don't know that too many people I got their CD also, that
Uh,
Quartet convention. So I've known High Road ever since that segment. So sadly, I just missed seeing Body. I did get to see Buck and actually got to meet him, that Quartet convention or another one, and I'm grateful I did. But yeah, that was a moment.
And was so I mean, Sarah is just she's such a Rambos fan. I love that Sarah has a dog named Buck, which I just
I didn't know that. Oh,
uh,
that is so cool. Now, one of the other things I was going to ask you about was, you know, there's only so many songs you can put on one CD. and you have to do the songs people want to hear. But one of the things I was going to ask you about was, in a world where you had infinite budget
Uh,
and you could do all the songs you liked, what are some other songs that would make the cut? No, I know you can't necessarily spoil the track list, but you said three words about a half an hour ago, and I noticed them. You said the next one.
I
And what can you say about that? I can't let that go without asking. What can you say about the next one?
think we have already talked. We feel like there will be a next, but just from some other stuff that, Daywin has just Ed has been so great about it. There's a choral book that goes along with it. It's just, people can buy the tracks, the stems, they can sing the song solo, or they can have a choir sing with them. So we do feel like this music needs to be out there. But there's several songs, that I think, when I think about Dottie's catalog, she has a song that a lot of people had, it's called "How Graciously Grace Has Covered My Sin."
Mhm.
Uh, I think back to those songs, "Too Much to Lose" is not on there. I think back to there's just so many she had so many songs. She had a catalog of she always said over 2,000, but there's just dozens and dozens when you go back and listen to her catalog. There's so many songs that I would love to see us do new versions of, and there's so many artists. I mean, it was really hard. I had to leave out some of my other artists that I absolutely loved, but, I just it was real hard. So I do feel like there will be a volume 2, maybe a volume 3. We're
Oh, what
And then you hear other new versions of songs from some of the CCM artists that have done stuff through the years of her music. It's not a lot out there, but there is some people are starting to all of a sudden wake up and say, "Oh, I heard this song somewhere." And I really want this to be just a reintroduction to her music. And there's other songwriters out there. I think Lanny Wolf is well deserving of his songs to live on. Bill Gaither, of course, is Bill Gaither, but there's still a lot of his songs that people have never heard that are in this modern world that we're in. So, yeah.
neat. Just going a little bit further, I think a lot of people know Daddy songs from the 60s and 70s. Her big songs,
Yep.
those are the songs people know. People know a few of the songs from the 80s. They know We Shall Be Holding, they know for whatever reason a few others. But you toured with her and worked with her a lot between that period and 2008. For not saying this is something that has to go on a record, but for somebody who doesn't know the work from later in her life, what are some of her songs they should go on YouTube or go on Spotify and look for?
I always say she always wanted to write a song like Cross. She always said, God, give me one song that would be like Cross Me. She wrote a song called Oh Blessed Hope that is
Mhm.
beautiful, and it's on I know she sings it on YouTube. We did it on TBN numerous times, but then, there was another guy by the name of Steve Brock that recorded it. It's absolutely beautiful. Oh, Blessed Hope, a song that Janet Paschal absolutely loved. She always said she wanted to record it, she never did. There's a song called He Sees Me Through the Blood that is absolutely stunning and just beautiful. Um she wrote, uh, I mean, that era was For What Earthly Reason, which is there, of course. She wrote, oh, blessed hope, Oil in the Wine. I don't know if you ever heard the song Oil.
That's one I don't know. I think that's the first one you've named I haven't heard.
It is one, and it was on a record. They only did one record with a company called Light. So when Reba signed with Light, they went over there and did one record, but she wrote it for when Reba went through her divorce. Yeah, I mean, and it's called Oil in the Wine. It's probably one of my favorite Dottie songs, and it's one that people would buy the record when she sang it, and that would be the only song she would sing from that record, but the song was powerful. Um, she had another song that I absolutely loved, that's on one of her little, solo projects. It's called, I had it in my mind. He went out of his way, but then, there was another one. She just had so many those later years, the 3 Buck and Dottie projects that she did, The Legend
Mhm.
Continues, Destined for the Throne, and then there was another one, and then, there was actually 4 records. They're chock full of just incredible songs that nobody really did a lot with. For What Earthly Reason was on there, Oh Blessed Hope, but she had some beautiful Breaking Bread. There's one about a communion song that is absolutely beautiful. We're breaking bread. Uh, Son of Thunder, Daughter of Light was a great fast song talking about who we are in Christ. We're sons of thunders and daughters of light. And I just think there's so many songs on those records. Dottie also did 4 she won a Grammy for an album she did in 1967 by herself called The
Mhm.
Soul, which was very gospel influenced, but she had 2 other records, Love Letters and, 3 other records, one called Tiny Love Letters, and then another one, Making My Own Place, that was solo that has some great songs on it that she wrote that are just they're just classic.
Mhm.
I have my whole
That,
I have my whole Rambo stash here. I should have pulled out some of these to, yeah, just to remind y'all of some of the songs
I
she wrote.
I
I
think I think that '67 solo record was the one that introduced a song that was huge for the Isaacs later, "He Ain't Never Done Me Nothing But Good."
exactly right. They sing it all the time. There was 2 other songs that I love that she loved a song called It Will Pass. I would want that on there. I don't know if you ever heard that song. And then
I have,
one
yes.
wrote 2 other songs that I've said they've gotta be on this project is, and she wrote it at Jimmy Swaggart's church at an altar call, is Bring All Your Needs to the Altar. She wrote it right while she was at the altar praying with people. She has a big choral kind of sound called Stand Still and See His Glory that was on the Rambos records that Phil Johnson produced. Um, yeah, she had so many songs, but I love the '60s and '70s was their real era, but those '80s and '90s, there's some hidden gems on some of those
Mhm.
that are just incredible. So
And the thing is, those gems are hidden,
oh,
and artists, if you're listening, go
yeah,
listen to her stuff from the '80s and '90s. You're probably gonna find something you wanna sing.
and every now and then I'll get an artist say, "Is there anything she wrote that didn't get recorded?" Yeah, there was a lot of them that she wrote that the Rambos sang, but nobody else did. But they're full of them. "Stand still and see his glory." When I hear some of these lyrics and some of the stuff, there's so many one of my favorite songs is, it was off of, I think it was the Crossin' Over record, which Phil produced. It's called "Nothing Like Home to Me," and, the lyrics, "Dusty road looks familiar, cattle grazing on a hill." It just takes you to where so many of these songs began, you know? But there's nothing like home, and then it turns it into one of these days, there's nothing like home that we're gonna be at.
Wonderful. So just moving toward wrapping up, are there any questions that I should have asked you about this album, but maybe didn't think of? Is there anything else you'd love to say about this album before we wrap up the conversation tonight?
I think I just would love this ad this re there again, I used to always would hate it when Dottie would say, "Man, it's hard to pick favorites, it's hard to" and it's hard to talk about your new records, but because I was so close to this record, I want people to hear this and to just be reminded of their own journeys and where they've come from, and that this music that we all sing and we talk about, so many of us were products of this music. It's what gets us through, and this record, I really want it to touch people's lives like it did mine going through those tough times. Like when I hear an artist, whoever it is, they'll say, "Oh, that Dottie Rambo song, that helped me." This is the perfect record, I think, that I would love for people to give to people who need to be introduced to this music because it's such a beautiful, representation of our not only our industry. I wish I coulda had a ton more artists on it, but there again, that time will bring that about. But just for them to see our music that and I call it our music, it's heart music. It's something that touches the depth of the heart that nothing else can.
Amen.
So What else would you like to ask? I was looking at our little notes here.
Oh, I have so many things I could ask, but, there's only so many hours in the day. Yeah, I think those are the highlights that I really wanted to get to for this album. Is there anything you'd like to promote? Where can people keep up with the latest releases from Daywind? Keep up with the social media? Anything along those lines?
We have Instagram, we have Facebook, and everything is under daywin.com or Daywind Worship. But one thing that we did that was really special for this record, look, I got even there it is. There it is.
Mhm,
The inside. It turned out so good. So
mhm.
great pictures of Dottie and just so many sweet things about this. Yeah, how God orchestrated that. But if you go to daywin.com/Dottie Rambo, you can find everything that Daywind has done, including the new project. We did a vintage inspired t-shirt with that image of her on it that everybody loved. That image actually came they she carried sheet music for years, and that was one of Dottie's favorite images on her sheet music, and a lot of people we would poll people, and they say, "What image did you love?" And they'd say, "We like that one where her hair was down." So, we wanted to use that image because that's what so many people remembered her from, and, so it has every soundtrack that David has ever done. It has the choral book, it has the song book with a ton of pictures and quotes from different artists that we did many years ago, soundtracks, karaoke, it has a couple of solo projects that we still sell, but it's just daywin.com/Dottie Rambo, and there's some specials on it. And we've got such a beautiful, wonderful array of talent with daywin.com that I'm just so proud of all of our artists. So proud of all of our artists.
Wonderful. And one more thing to plug, I don't wanna leave without mentioning I love to tell the story one more time. Where can people keep up with your podcast?
Go to iTunes, you can go to Spotify, you can go to Pandora, and it's just we love if you go to YouTube and subscribe, there's no cost to it. Just press subscribe here and listen to it. It's every Tuesday, we have a new one. Got some great ones coming up that I'm really excited about. We're gonna have some good stuff the rest of the year, and it's just simply, I love to tell the story, and, we're on Instagram, Facebook, all that stuff.
And just a little tip for somebody who's on YouTube, if you just type in "I love to tell the story," you might get a grand old hymn. Just type in "I love to tell the story podcast," and you're gonna get it.
That's great. Look at you. I love that, Daniel, you've been awesome.
Thank you so much. And to the listener, I would say thank you for listening to Southern Gospel Journal. You can keep up with the latest episodes on YouTube, Facebook, your favorite podcast platform, or on southerngospeljournal.com. Thanks for listening.
Thank you, Daniel. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.